Today we're going to discuss die, vinyl, and laser cutters specifically for fabric. We'll speak a little bit about each one in detail and then I'll discuss the best ones from each category. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first type of machine is a die cutting machine. On a die cutting machine, you place your die down and then layer the fabric on top. On top of the fabric, you'll place a piece of plastic and then run it through the machine. The end result is perfectly cut shapes that you can then use on projects. The pros to using the machine is that you don't have to worry about using a computer to load designs. You don't have to learn any software, and it's very plug and play type of equipment, so you don't have to worry about anything. The con to using a die cutter is that you are limited to the amount of dies that you have for cutting out projects, and it's manual crank, so you're cranking along. Though I know now there are some electronic ones available, it's still extremely manual. When you are purchasing a die cutter, you're going to have to look for a cutter with a bed size that's big enough to do all of your projects. And then also you're going to want to find a cutter that is compatible with the kind of dies that you would like to use for your projects. Who is this die cutter for? I would say the only person that would you be using a die cutter for cutting fabric is going to be a quilter, because if you're doing anything else, you're going to need more variety in what you cut. Now, I have known some bag makers to use this method for cutting, but they are definitely limited in the amount of bag patterns that they can do, because you can only do what your machine has the dies for that are compatible with it. Now let's talk about vinyl cutters and how they work. A vinyl cutter uses a small knife to precisely cut the outline of a figure. The knife moves side to side and turns, while the vinyl, or whatever material you're using, is moved beneath the knife. The result from this is a precisely cut image. So what are the pros and cons of using a vinyl cutter? Well, let's start off with the pros. The pros are that a vinyl cutter is small and compact, it's readily available, and there's lots of online help if you need assistance with how to use a vinyl cutter. The cons are that you must learn how to use the software for the cutter. You also have to replace blades quite frequently. And as the blade gets worn, you have to increase the blade depth in order to properly cut your material. Also, depending on what machine you get, you're really going to have to play around with blade depth in order to get a proper cut. So that means you're going to go through a lot of test materials in order to get this done. So, what should you consider when getting a vinyl cutter specifically for fabric? First and foremost, you're going to want to make sure you get a machine that has a servo motor and not a stepper motor. Servo motors are most efficient with efficiency between 80 and 90%. They are best for high torque, high speed applications, while stepper motors are better suited for lower acceleration, high holding torque applications. Next, you're going to want to consider the cutting force. You're going to want a machine with great cutting force so you can cut through thicker materials. You're also going to want to consider the drive housing. The drive housing rotates the blade itself and makes for a much better cut. Without that, the machine will have to use the negative space within your design to turn the blade, which will result in a less clean, less polished look. You want to get a machine that has a availability for a rotary blade and not the standard blades. Standard blades will cut fabric. However, if you're going to use standard blades, you have to back your fabric with a heat and bond light or with some type of interfacing in order for you to get a clean cut. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, and that can be a problem if you are looking to cut out patterns where you don't want to use a interfacing. The next thing that you're going to want to consider is software. Software is extremely important. On most consumer-based machines, they have their own proprietary software that you have to use with their cutter. And this could be a problem because if the company ever changes their policies surrounding their software as far as being able to import your own designs, then you are greatly affected by that. Also, if they ever stop support on the software, then your machine basically becomes a paperweight. And we don't want that. We want to be able to use our machines long as possible. More of the machines on the commercial side offer their own proprietary software, but also allow you to use other softwares like Cuts a lot or something like that for cutting out your designs. And that's much better because it's more versatile, so that if a software is discontinued or if the policies change, you can just change softwares and still be able to use your machine. The next thing to consider is the cutting area. So the machines have a cutting area, say 12 by 24, but the actual cutting area is going to be slightly smaller because the blade can't go on the outer perimeter. So for example, you might have a machine that cuts 12 by 24, but once you look at the actual cut that you're able to do with that machine, it might be 11 and a half by 23 and a half. And that makes a huge difference because for some people that would be too small. Last but not least, you're going to want to consider whether the vinyl cutter is sensor based or camera based, because if you are doing something like print and cut, where you are printing out labels, putting them in the vinyl cutter, and then cutting out all of your labels, you're going to want that to be lined up perfectly. And in order to get that lined up perfectly, it's best to have a machine that has a camera in it instead of having one that is sensor based. Who is a vinyl cutter most suitable for? I would have to say that a vinyl cutter is most suitable for the home user because it is nice and compact and it has a somewhat low upfront cost. But I would say that in the long run, you really do end up spending a lot of money with a vinyl cutter because you constantly have to replace blades. You're going to have to replace mats, especially if you're working with fabric. And in some cases, you're going to have to back your fabric with a interfacing or a heat and bond light before you actually run that through the machine. Also, I would say that there's a lot of hassle involved with using a vinyl cutter because you have to constantly adjust the blade depth and really have to kind of fight with the machine in a way to get it to cut your materials to the right depth. Now let's talk about lasers. For cutting fabric, you'll want to get a CO2 laser. A CO2 laser is a type of gas laser. In this device, electricity is run through a glass-filled tube producing light. The ends of the tube are mirrors. One is fully reflective and the other one lets some light through. The gas mixture is generally comprised of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, hydrogen, and helium. The light produced from this reaction is powerful enough to cut many materials, including cloth, wood, and paper. What are the pros and cons of having a laser cutter? The pro is that you don't have any blades to worry about replacing. You get much cleaner cuts than what you get with a vinyl cutter. You have an easier time cutting through thick materials. It's much faster than a vinyl cutter because there's no blade that has to actually come in contact with the material. There's less waste because once you set the laser to cut a certain depth one time, you never have to test it again. You can just set those settings in there and just print away forever and not have to worry about testing materials. The cons are that you have to replace those tubes every so often. It requires ventilation because of all the fumes. And generally there are air filters or some type of filtration system that you'll need to have as well. A lot of the lasers take up a lot of space, though there are multiple different types of lasers. You have your tabletop lasers, which come in the covered and closed type and the one that is open. And then you have your floor models, which are much, much larger. The last con is that you have to learn software. And that is a con to me because I don't like to learn software. So who is this laser most suitable for? It's suitable for someone who would like to work with thicker materials, and it's suitable for someone who is running a business and needs things to be extremely precise and for the job to go extremely fast, much faster than what you would have on even a vinyl cutter. What should you consider when purchasing a laser cutter? First and foremost, you're going to want to consider the power. 45 watts should be good enough for anybody, but I could be wrong. Speed. Most of the machines do 500 meters per second, and I think that is sufficient for any type of fabric. You really don't need to go faster for that, but if it goes faster, great. Work area. How much fabric can you put underneath the machine? Now, some of the machines have more than one way that you can insert your material. You're going to want a machine where you can insert your material from the top or from the side, this way that you don't lose area when you are placing your fabric underneath the machine. So the size of the machine is also going to matter. There are floor model laser cutters, and then there's the desktop. I most recommend the desktop versions of this machine for anybody that is using the machine from home, just because it takes up less space. Last but not least, you're going to want to consider software. Just like with the vinyl cutters that we spoke about earlier, you have certain laser cutters that use their own proprietary software. You're most going to want a machine that is open source, that you can use whatever software that you want to use with it. So, what are the best cutters for cutting fabric? Well, in the die cutting category, I picked the AccuQuilt Ready Set Go. The AccuQuilt is 90% faster than scissors or a rotary cutter, and it allows you to cut up to 6 layers of fabric accurately. This will save you a tremendous amount of time. Not only will the machine save you a lot of time, but it comes with a ton of accessories and allows you to do everything you would need to do right out of the box. The next die cutter that I chose was a Sizzix Big Shot Plus. It has a 9-inch opening, which means you can use it for 8.5 by 11 materials. It also comes with different cutting platforms so that it can cut thin metal dies right up to big steel dies. So you can cut with a wide variety of dies with this particular brand, and that's the main reason why I chose it. As far as the best vinyl cutter is concerned, I really did have a hard time with this, and I was inconclusive. The Cricut Maker is the best machine for fabric in the vinyl maker category so far, because it has the availability of the rotary blade, it has the drive housing that helps to rotate the blade, and it has a servo motor. However, the Cricut comes up light when it comes to the software, because there have been a lot of problems with the company as a whole when it comes to the software. I think it was last year they wanted to impose an upload limit on your custom designs, and there was so much backlash that they were unable to do that. And also there have just been lots of issue with the software in general. At first, you were unable to use the software at all unless you had an internet connection. Now you're able to use it offline, but you must first upload designs and tell the program that you would like to have it saved as an offline design. And that is a problem for a lot of people. So that is the main reason why a lot of people just stay away from the Cricut Maker altogether. Now, when we're talking about the Silhouette Cameo, it is a much cheaper build, and it doesn't have the servo motor, but instead 2 stepper motors, which makes the machine much louder and much noisier. Plus, it doesn't have the drive housing to help to rotate the blade, so you don't get quite as clean of a cut as you would with your Cricut Maker. There is the Juliet that has just come out, and the Juliet is a wonderful machine because it has the camera built inside of it, but rotary blades are not available for it. I have heard whispers of there being a rotary blade available in the future, and if there were a rotary blade available, then it will most definitely blow both Cricut and Silhouette out of the water in terms of its use for fabric. In the laser cutter category, I would most likely choose a desktop laser and not a floor model, simply because it is smaller and more compact and easy to fit into a space, and you also don't have to have separate units for your air compressor and water cooling system if you have a tabletop machine and not one of the floor models. Usually a desktop system has the air compressor, the water cooler, the air filter, and an exhaust tube already built into it, so you don't have to worry about any of those things. The two machines that I picked were the OnTech Polar and the Geek Cloud. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Geek Cloud is a Chinese-based company, so personally, since I'm an embroiderer, I would compare that to something like a Ricoma. That's also a Chinese brand that is sold here in the United States. However, of course, you would be able to get the machine even cheaper than that if you were to go directly to Alibaba and pick up one of those machines from there. A lot of people will be skeptical about getting a laser cutter from Alibaba, but I have used and seen a laser cutter that is from Alibaba that works just fine, and it is a floor model. Everybody's best machine is going to be somewhat different, but I do hope that you got some valuable information out of this video and are able to take the suggestions for what to look for in a machine and find the machine that is best for you. I hope you really enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe to receive more sewing related content.